Imagine being left alone at the most vulnerable moment of your life, facing betrayal, fear, and heartbreak when everything you counted on collapses. Watch as one woman fights for her child, her dignity, and her future, discovering courage she never knew she had. Rain drummed against the cracked windows of an old apartment overlooking the restless city. Inside, Ion, once a celebrated photographer whose portraits spoke louder than words, sat surrounded by his ghosts, rolls of undeveloped film, cameras that hadn't clicked in years, and a silence that stretched like a wound. The city below pulsed with color and noise, but inside this room, everything was gray. He hadn't taken a picture since Noor, his wife, passed away 2 winters ago. Her absence was everywhere, in the cold coffee cups, in the undone bed, in the way sunlight entered the room but never stayed. He'd built this place for her once, calling it the Studio of Light, where they captured stories of strangers who still believed in love. Now it was just a graveyard of memories. The walls were lined with frames that stared back at him, moments frozen in time, mocking the man who once could stop it. The only sound was the hum of an old fridge and the occasional car horn cutting through the fog. He sat in his chair, camera in hand, lens cap still on, fingers tracing the scratches on the body, as if remembering how it used to feel to breathe through art. Outside, thunder rolled like a slow heartbeat, and the lights flickered, momentarily drowning the room in darkness. In that moment, Ion whispered to himself, maybe the world forgot how to look. Then, from the alley below, a soft voice broke through the rain, a young girl's laugh, quick and defiant against the storm. Ion turned toward the sound, his camera instinctively lifting toward the window though the lens stayed covered. The laughter echoed again, brighter this time, and for the first time in months, he felt something stir beneath the heaviness. Not joy, not even hope, just curiosity. It was the kind of sound that made him remember why he'd ever pointed a camera at life in the first place. But before he could see her face, the streetlight flickered out, leaving only the reflection of his own tired eyes in the glass, the reflection of a man who once chased light and was now afraid of it. He lowered the camera slowly, the silence rushing back in. Yet somewhere deep inside, a pulse returned, faint but alive. The next morning bled in through thin curtains, pale and uncertain, like the light itself was afraid to disturb the silence. Ion sat at his desk, his camera still pointed at the window where the laughter had echoed the night before. He told himself it was just the rain playing tricks, that there was no girl, no reason to feel this pull again, but something in him refused to let it go. As he adjusted the focus ring, dust danced through the beam of light like tiny spirits, and for the first time, he noticed the street below, a narrow lane lined with peeling walls, laundry fluttering like flags of survival, and a small art shop across the street that hadn't been there before. Its window displayed hand-painted cards and photographs of ordinary people, a cobbler smiling mid-laughter, an old couple feeding pigeons, a child clutching a broken kite. His chest tightened. Those pictures felt like pieces of his own heart scattered outside his reach. Before he could stop himself, Ion put on his coat and stepped into the drizzle. The city air hit him, sharp, alive, and every sound felt louder after months of hiding from them. Inside the shop, a young woman with paint-stained hands looked up from a canvas. She couldn't have been more than 20. Her hair was tied carelessly, her eyes full of light that refused to be tamed. "Can I help you?" she asked with a grin that didn't need effort. Ion hesitated. "Your photos, they're beautiful. Who took them?" She wiped her hands on her apron. "Me. I take pictures of people who don't think they're worth photographing." He studied her, the unpolished sincerity, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she spoke. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zara," she replied. "And you?" "Ion," he said, the name tasting foreign, as if it belonged to someone who no longer existed. Her eyes widened. "The photographer Ion Mirza? My mom has one of your prints, the one from the Lahore floods." He looked away, discomfort flickering like static. "That was a long time ago." Zara smiled softly. Still, the light in that photo never left. He didn't answer, but something about her words hit him in a place too deep for language. As he turned to leave, She called after him, "You should come tomorrow, I'm teaching kids how to use disposable cameras. They don't care about perfection, only about what's real." Ion paused at the door, the bell above it trembling in the breeze. For the first time in 2 years, he didn't say no. When he stepped outside, the rain had stopped, and the city looked different, not brighter, but somehow less cruel. He looked up at the sky, pale and wide, and whispered to himself, "Maybe the world hasn't forgotten. Maybe I did." The next morning, Zara woke to the sharp scent of smoke curling through the bedroom, a dry, acrid taste coating her tongue as sunlight fractured across the floor in jagged shards. Panic clamped around her chest as she bolted upright, only to find the kitchen engulfed in a thin, eerie haze, the soup pot she had forgotten on the stove now blackened and smoking, curling ribbons of ash floating toward the ceiling like tiny ghosts. Heart hammering, she grabbed a towel to smother the lingering embers, but the fear didn't fade. It had dug deeper, settling in her stomach like a stone, reminding her of every instance she'd felt powerless, unseen, trapped in a life that demanded more than she could give. And then, as if fate itself wanted to force her hand, her phone rang, an unfamiliar number, insistent, urgent, and when she answered, the voice on the other end shattered her fragile calm, a hospital nurse, breathless, informing her that her mother had collapsed suddenly, had been rushed in, and the situation was critical. Everything else, the cold arguments, the silent betrayal, the sleepless nights, evaporated instantly, replaced by a visceral, paralyzing dread that left her gripping the counter, knuckles white, mind racing through impossible choices. Should she leave the baby in the house alone, risk calling a neighbor, or drag herself into a car she barely felt steady enough to drive? Her body trembled not just from shock but from the long-ignored tension between submission and defiance, the same tension that had kept her silent for years, and in that moment, staring at the curling smoke and the baby monitor's soft beep, she realized she could no longer wait for anyone else to rescue her. The house, the child, even her own life demanded her courage now. She grabbed the baby, swaddled and warm, and as she locked the apartment door behind her, she noticed Ion slumped in the hallway, groaning, eyes unfocused, remnants of last night's alcohol still clinging to his clothes. For the first time, anger and fear collided into clarity. He was not a partner, not a protector, not even a witness to the life unfolding around him, and the weight of that truth hit her harder than any blow. The rain had returned outside, hammering the windows, and she felt the baby stir against her chest, soft and helpless, a heartbeat she could not abandon, and with trembling hands she dialed the hospital again to confirm the ward, then threw a glance at Ion, muttering under her breath, "This ends now," before stepping out into the storm, each step soaked and heavy, yet purposeful. Every flash of lightning illuminated a woman transformed, her fear sharpened into resolve, the chaos of smoke, rain, and sirens merging into a single, cinematic crescendo, a life-altering moment that would not be undone. She would save her mother, protect her child, and finally, confront the life she had been forced to endure, fully aware that from this turning point, nothing could ever remain the same. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly under the harsh fluorescent lights, each echo of Zara's hurried footsteps magnifying the pounding of her heart as she clutched her baby close, the tiny body wriggling against her chest. And she could feel the rain still dripping from her coat, soaking her hair and chilling her skin, a visceral reminder that the storm outside mirrored the storm she carried inside. At the nurse's station, she was met with anxious faces and hurried instructions, confirming her mother was stable but in intensive care, her condition critical enough that every second counted, and as she held the phone to update her father, a voice behind her cut through the chaos, Ion, drenched, eyes wide, mouth opening to speak, but faltering as he took in the sight of her resolve, the baby in her arms, and the intensity etched across her face. "Zara, wait, let me explain," he stammered, desperation and fear mingling in his tone, but she shook her head sharply, the exhaustion, betrayal, and years of silence boiling to the surface. There's nothing to explain anymore, Ayan, she said, voice trembling yet steady, the baby cooing softly against her shoulder, a fragile rhythm that contrasted with the storm raging in her chest. You weren't here when it mattered, not for me, not for this child, not for anyone who depended on you. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine. He stepped closer, reaching out as if to plead, but she flinched, instinctively retreating a step, her mind replaying every cruel word, every dismissive glance, every moment she had been forced to bend under his indifference. And yet beneath the anger was something deeper, a raw, aching sorrow for the life she had imagined and the love that had never arrived. Please, he whispered, voice cracking, I didn't mean for it to get this far. I can fix it. We can fix it. Just don't leave me alone with this. But Zara's hands tightened around the baby, heart hammering, tears threatening to spill. Because the truth was undeniable. He had left her alone when her world fractured, and no promises, no explanations could erase that. Her parents appeared beside her then, calm yet protective, eyes locked on Ayan with a silent warning, their presence a shield and a mirror reflecting what she had always known. She was not weak, she was not powerless. And this moment would no longer be defined by his failures. It's over, Ayan, she said, voice rising slightly, carrying both sorrow and determination. I won't let fear or obligation bind me anymore. You failed us, and I will not let your absence define our future. The hospital lights flickered as a nurse wheeled a gurney past, the baby squirming against her shoulder, and in that fleeting moment, the world seemed suspended, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant cries of other patients, the steady beeping of machines, all converging into a cinematic tableau of choice and consequence, and Zara, soaked, exhausted, and yet impossibly alive, realized that leaving him behind was not just an act of defiance, but the first step toward claiming a life she could protect, a life where her child's cries were met with warmth and safety, not fear and neglect. And as she looked at Ayan, his face pale and vulnerable, she felt the sharp edge of liberation cut through her heart, a liberation born of loss, betrayal, and the unshakable certainty that her path forward, though uncertain, was hers alone to define. Setting the stage for a reckoning that would leave no room for compromise, only truth, consequence, and the raw, aching pulse of life she was finally ready to embrace. The hospital room felt impossibly still, the dim light casting long shadows across the walls as Zara sat upright in the chair, baby swaddled in her arms, each tiny breath a fragile counterpoint to the storm roaring in her chest, and outside the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the hesitant glow of street lamps, mirroring the strange clarity settling in her mind. Ayan's calls had ceased, replaced by a silence thick with the weight of everything unsaid, everything broken. And yet she felt a pulse of defiance, a fierce recognition that this moment was hers to define, not his, not anyone's, as footsteps approached and the lawyer's calm voice cut through the tense air, confirming that the divorce papers were finalized, signed, and irrevocable, each word a hammer striking against the fragile illusion of the life she once believed in, and she realized with a sharp, bitter clarity that love had not betrayed her, he had, and the responsibility to protect herself and her child was hers alone. Ayan appeared then, hesitant at the door, drenched from the rain that had returned in a hesitant drizzle, eyes wide, raw, desperate, as though he were seeing the full weight of his absence for the first time, voice trembling. Zara, I can explain, but she shook her head, the baby stirring against her chest, a tiny hand curling around her finger, grounding her in the profound, immediate reality of her life, and in that moment, a surge of rage, sorrow, and liberation collided. Her voice rising, steady, unwavering, carrying the kind of power that only comes from finally owning one's pain. No, Ayan. There's nothing left to explain. You chose when it mattered most to be absent. You turned your back when it could have destroyed me, and I survived, not because of you, but in spite of you. I am leaving this room, this life of waiting for someone who will never arrive, and I am taking my child with me. You will not touch us again. His mouth opened, faltering, a mix of protest and pleading hanging unformed in the air, but she continued, voice now almost a whisper yet heavy with absolute finality. Look at us. Look at this life, my child, my strength. You are too late. Your regrets do not belong to us. You cannot buy back what you have lost with words or promises or shame. I am done forgiving you. I am done hoping for a man who cannot see what is right in front of him. We are leaving, and nothing you do now can change it. Tears glistened in her eyes, not from fear or sorrow, but from the raw, blistering relief of liberation, and she could feel her parents' steady presence behind her, their hands brushing hers in quiet, unspoken support, while the lawyer stood firm, a silent shield between her and the man who had once defined her world, and Ion's face shifted through disbelief, denial, anger, and finally, the hollow shadow of understanding that he had lost something irretrievable, his voice breaking as he whispered, I never wanted this, and she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the rain outside and the steady rhythm of her child's breathing wash over her, feeling the weight of years lifted from her shoulders, the past splintering into fragments that could no longer hurt her, and when she opened them, she saw clearly the life that awaited, one built not on apologies or empty promises, but on choices she made, protection she could provide, love she could nurture, and freedom she had fought for. A cinematic tableau of rebirth where sorrow became strength, fear became resolve, and the first rays of dawn broke through the window, illuminating her face and the tiny features of her child, a radiant proof of endurance, courage, and unshakable will. And as the camera of life seemed to pull back, framing her in the golden morning light with the quiet city beyond, she took the first step out of the hospital, each footfall a defiance, a promise, and a declaration that her story, her child's story, would be written by her alone, and in that single, electrifying, unforgettable moment, the audience understood that liberation, though born in pain, could be more beautiful than any love lost. The city hummed softly outside the apartment window, the first light of morning painting everything in muted gold, and Zara sat cross-legged on the floor, the baby nestled against her chest, eyes wide and luminous, tracing the soft curve of her collarbone as if already learning the rhythm of her heartbeat, and in the quiet, she could feel the weight of the past months lifting like fog retreating from the edges of a valley, the echoes of Ion's voice, the shouts, the coldness, and the betrayals, had begun to dissolve into memory, leaving only the clarity of choice and the permanence of her own courage, and she realized, with a delicate shiver that ran from the tips of her fingers to the crown of her head, that she had survived everything not by ignoring pain, but by facing it, by turning it into a shield and a compass, and in that moment, she understood that the life ahead was hers to sculpt, every day a blank page, every decision a stroke of color on a canvas that belonged only to her. And her child, her parents' presence lingered nearby, quiet and steady, like the deep roots of a tree that had weathered storms, offering warmth without intrusion, and her phone lay untouched, silent, a small victory in itself. The messages from Ion and his family now meaningless symbols of a world she had left behind, while outside, neighbors began their routines, the hum of the city a distant reminder that life moved forward, that time did not pause for anyone. And she found herself smiling softly at the thought that she had inherited a freedom far more precious than any comfort or stability he had once claimed to offer, as she prepared a simple breakfast, the baby gurgling and reaching toward the soft sunlight spilling across the floor. Zara thought about Sarah and her husband, their unexpected friendship now a foundation of safety and trust, and she realized that human connection, built on loyalty and courage, could be a force as enduring and transformative as any love lost, and, in the small, intimate rituals of feeding, rocking, and whispering little words of comfort to the child, she felt a pulse of profound possibility. That love, in its purest form, was not possession, not expectation, not compromise of self, but the quiet, steady act of creation, protection, and presence. The apartment, modest and sunlit, felt expansive, filled with invisible threads of hope, laughter yet to come, nights of whispered secrets and mornings of endless discovery. And Zara allowed herself, for the first time in months, to imagine the life she wanted without fear, a life where mistakes of others could no longer dictate her heart, where she could be both guardian and guide, mother and individual. And in this vision, the world seemed vast yet intimate, harsh yet forgiving, a place where endings were beginnings in disguise, and the city outside, indifferent yet alive, reflected the rhythm of her own awakening, the cadence of survival, and the promise of renewal. As the day unfolded, neighbors stopping by to admire the baby, the sunlight shifting through the room like slow music, Zara felt a stirring of wonder at the ordinary miracles around her, the way her child's tiny fingers curled around hers, the way the kettle whistled softly in the kitchen, the way a single beam of light caught the curve of her shoulder like a benediction, and she knew that, even amidst the scars and the echoes of betrayal, there existed a profound and undeniable beauty in the reclamation of one's life, a quiet power in choosing herself and her child over fear, resentment, or the hollow comforts of a love that had never truly been equal. In the evening, she carried the baby to the balcony, the wind lifting strands of hair across her face, and looked out over the rooftops, the streets glistening from a passing rain, the city breathing in a rhythm all its own, and she felt the weight of all that had been shed settle into a new lightness, a recognition that her story, though scarred, was hers to tell, and that the world, in all its chaos and indifference, had nothing on the clarity of a heart fully claimed by its own courage, fully surrendered to love without compromise. She whispered the child's name, soft and reverent, a benediction and a promise all at once, and in the golden quiet, the baby smiled, a tiny, perfect curve that seemed to contain the entirety of the future, and Zara felt a fierce, almost holy surge of protection and tenderness, knowing that, whatever storms might come, they would face them together. And as the stars began to punctuate the night sky, she pressed the child to her chest once more, listening to the steady rhythm of their shared breath, feeling the infinite possibility of a life rebuilt from the fragments of heartbreak. And she understood, with the crystalline certainty of one who has been to the edge and returned, that freedom, love, and the quiet strength of choosing oneself were the truest inheritance a mother could give, and that in this ordinary, miraculous moment, the story did not end, it began. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more powerful real-life dramas, comment your thoughts below, and join the conversation, because every voice matters, and every story deserves to be heard.